Howdy folks, Banjo Dan here with another installment of the Eclectic Banjo.
And I am Fraylin Danny. I will be asking pertinent questions, contributing valuable lines of thought, and definitely not be making any humorous observations or non sequiturs.
In this series, I steadily work through aspects of music theory in bite-sized chunks. Each lesson builds on the one before it, so material that might be unfamiliar with one lesson can be reviewed in previous ones. In this video, I will be talking about the G major scale, the key of G, and standard G tuning. What they are, how they're different, and how they're used on the banjo.
Why do they call it a scale? How much do notes really weigh?
Before we jump in, allow me to make a humble request. Like this elephant, trying to create interesting content is a big thing. Like this mouse, clicking that like button is a relatively small thing. But what if I told you that there was a way you could turn a small thing into a big thing? Clicking that like button would do just that.
The like button?
The G major scale has been around a long time. The ancient Greeks first developed the major scale's tonal structure sometime in the Middle Ages, 500 to 1500 AD, with its through-tone system of tetrachords.
Is that the best the internet can do? Sometime in a 1,000-year span?
Major scales didn't rise to prominence until the Baroque period in music history, though, sometime around 1600 to 1750.
Now we're getting somewhere.
There are many kinds of scales in music, such as the chromatic, diatonic, and pentatonic scales. The G major scale is a 7-note diatonic scale. Because it has 7 notes, it can also be called a heptatonic scale, though not all heptatonic scales are diatonic in nature.
Diatonic scale this, through tone that? What are you talking about?
Diatonic simply means through tone, a way to describe the whole and half-step formulas. Well, in order for us to learn more about its origins, we need to go back in time again. Back to the ancient Greeks. They invented a musical construct involving notes with certain pitches in descending order called a tetrachord. Despite what the name might suggest, they played tetrachords melodically, or one note at a time. A tetrachord is a set of 4 notes spanning a perfect fourth interval, or 5 half steps in length. Half steps, abbreviated with a capital H, measure the tonal distance between 2 notes. A whole step, abbreviated with a capital W, equals 2 half steps.
Going up?
Let's use an example of a tetrachord used in the G major scale. From G to C is a perfect fourth. Its steps between notes are as follows. From G to A is a whole step. From A to B is a whole step. From B to C is a half step. So one tetrachord has the following whole step half step formula, WWH. Now let's imagine I added another perfect fourth interval like D to G after the G to C tetrachord. What does that look like?
Ah!
Now we have 2 tetrachords, each with their own formula, WWH, WWH. In order to tie the tetrachords together, we just need to add another whole step between the ending note of the first tetrachord, C, and the starting note of the next, D, since between the 2 notes resides C sharp or D flat. Thus we get the major scale's diatonic formula, WWH, WWWH. All major scales follow this formula of whole and half step separations between notes, including G major. One needs only plug in any starting note, called the tonic, and select notes in the chromatic scale based on this major scale's whole and half step formula. This formula can be rearranged for an assortment of other scale modes too. A lesson for another time. Now let's look at some other details about the G major scale. The G major scale contains the following 7 notes: G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. The scale is ordered by relative pitch from lowest on the left, tonic G, to the highest on the right, leading tone F sharp. A is 1 pitch higher than G, E is 1 pitch higher than D, etc. The octave G is sometimes shown with the other 7 notes to signify completeness, such as the scale is at the end of one octave and rises to the next. The octave G is not technically part of the 7-note scale. Also consider that every note in Western music, A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, is represented once and only once in a diatonic scale. This helps explain why G flat is not used in place of F sharp. 2 kinds of Gs would break the unique note rule. To better understand why the G major scale has the notes it does, let's look at some whole and half step charts. There are 12 notes total in Western music, 7 naturals and 5 notes with sharp and flat alternatives. Recall that the formula for the G major scale is WWH, WWWH. Going from G to A is 2 half steps or 1 whole step, A to B is 2 half steps or 1 whole step, B to C is a half step, C to D, D to E, and E to F sharp are all 2 half steps or 1 whole step apart from each interval. And the last little step up to octave G is another half step. Now imagine we skipped those half steps in the formula and just did WWWWWW. We'd arrive at the same octave G, but wind up with some weird notes, not to mention entirely skipping a pitch in the scale, which would give Mr. Diatonic scale a frowny face. So now you can rest assured knowing that the scale notes are what they are, or something like that.
Banjo Dan, the G major scale and the key of G is pretty much the same thing, isn't it?
They're similar, my boy, but have different contexts. The scale is a sequence of ascending notes used to create melodies and harmonies. The key of G major uses all the notes in the G major scale and even has a key signature to let people know to sharp that F. But the key relates more to a collection of tones within the scale around which a piece of music is built. By the way, when someone says the key of G, they're implying G major and not something else like G minor. Let's look at some tonal center charts now.
Oh, I love going to tonal centers.
Each note within the key of G has a particular function that supports the key in some way. Notes create aural tension by pulling away from a tonal center or release tension by moving back towards it.
Aural?
Yeah, aural, like relating to hearing. G is the tonic or tonal center. The key achieves its maximal melodic and harmonic resolution at G. A is one note after G and thus is the supertonic. The supertonic can lead a tonal center towards a subdominant position within a song. Named after its position between the tonic and dominant tones, B is the mediant. It can be used as an intermediary to bridge tonal centers between the tonic and subdominant. C, as the subdominant, often serves a predominant function that leads a tonality away from the tonic and into the dominant tone. D, as the dominant tone, dominates tension and creates the strongest pull against the tonic. E, as the submediant, sits between the subdominant and octave tonic and serves a similar purpose to the mediant, to bridge tonalities from the subdominant to the octave tonic. Finally, F sharp as the leading tone seeks resolution by strongly pulling a tonal center back to the tonic. The key of G's harmonic tonal center is the G major triad, GBD, the most stablest of chords that can be played in the G major scale. Every note within the scale has its own triad, built with 2 other notes that are at every other interval apart from the note in question. And just like with the melodic tonal center, these triads will either pull away from GBD's tonal center and create tension, or help resolve the tension by moving back to GBD. This concept of pulling away and going back to the tonal center is called a chord progression, and is what makes songs sound upbeat or fun or sad or angry depending on what chords are used. Roman numerals are used to describe a chord progression, and they can also be used to describe kinds of chords too. Capital Roman numerals designate major triads, lowercase numerals stand for minor triads, and a lowercase numeral with a degree symbol after it stands for a diminished triad. In short, tension creates anticipation and interest, which resolves when the song gets back to its tonal center. And that is the function of the key of G. It determines the collection of chords and tones around which a piece of music is built. Let's look at an example. The first part of the well-known melodic instrumental, Blackberry Blossom, describes this concept of tension and resolution well. It's an 8 measure phrase that could be split into 2 4 measure phrases. The chord progression for the first 2 measures of Blackberry Blossom begin with the notes of the G major triad, then move to the D major triad, then to the C major triad, and then arrive back to the G major triad. This chord progression is known as a 1-5-4-1 progression. The tune repeats the 4-1 progression twice, which creates a pleasant pull away and coming back to the tonic. The 4 measure phrase ends with a modulation to the key of D through the parallel chord to A minor, which of course is A major. This modulation serves to build anticipation toward the resolution at the end of the part. The second phrase repeats the first 3 measures and then brings the resolution that we, the listeners, have been waiting for. A partial 5-7 chord followed by the resolution.
I'm resolved to tell you that I like it.
One last thing before we finish up. I overheard a banjo player say that he was in the key of G tuning, and I'd like to say that this line of thinking is not quite accurate.
Oh man, who told you?
Tuning is based on intervals and consonant tones within a scale or key and serves to help make playing the piece in a particular key easier. Let's look at how the intervals and notes in standard G tuning relate to notes on an extended G major scale. The lowest note, D, on the 4th string is a perfect 4th below the next lowest note, G, on the 3rd string. B on the 2nd string is a major 3rd higher than G, and D on the 1st string is a perfect 5th higher than G. Finally, the 5th string resides at the octave G from the 3rd string G. Well, let's put all this learning together by enjoying Blackberry Blossom in the key of G, which uses mostly notes from the G major scale, and is played in standard G tuning.
Well done.
That about wraps it up for this lesson. If you want to see more of this type of content, feel free to click that subscribe button so that you can be notified whenever I post new content.
And if you appreciated any of my contributions to the video, Banjo Dan actually pays me according to the amount of likes that I can produce, so go on, click it. It's right down there. Go ahead, click it. You know what I'm talking about. Just click it. That's it.
On behalf of Danny and myself, we'll see you next time here